afternoon and good evening to everyone. Are we together? Okay, I would like to start now the webinar. Welcome everyone to the second session of our 2026 Land Degradation Neutrality webinar series. My name is Eleanor Tarokoidion, and I'm the chairperson of the Journalists Environmental Association of Tanzania and a current member of the UNCCD CSO panel representing Africa for the period of 2025-2026. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping points. This webinar is being recorded. Translation is available in Spanish and French, while we will be speaking in English. However, if to access translation, please choose the channel on the reference at the bottom of your computer or device and click on the world icon. There you will be able to access the choice language that you will want to use. You are warmly encouraged to use the chat box to introduce yourself, share reflections, and exchange with other participants. Please use the Q&A function to post your questions to the panelists. Please make it clear if you're addressing a question to a specific panelist. If possible, mention their name. We will dedicate time for interaction and Q&A session after the presentations. We kindly ask you to be concise with your questions so that as many voices as possible can be heard. Now, this series takes place within the framework of the project Strengthening Civil Society Role in Achieving Land Degradation Neutrality, supported by the Global Environmental Facility, GEF, and implemented by Drynet, IUCN, and both ends. This annual webinar series aims to enhance the knowledge and capacities of civil society organizations on key topics related to land degradation neutrality. Remember that participants who fully attend at least 3 of the 4 webinars will receive a certificate of participation. And over the next 75 minutes, we will explore gender in the context of land degradation neutrality. So, what is the objective? Today's webinar's objectives are mainly described in 4 groups. Number 1 is to explain why gender equality is essential to achieving land degradation neutrality, followed by describe how gender is integrated within the UNCCD framework, including the Gender Action Plan and COP mandates relevant to LDN. But also, we will learn how to identify how gender dimensions affect LDN target setting, land restoration, drought responses, and monitoring. And also, we will recognize entry points for civil society engagement in promoting gender-responsive land degradation neutrality. Now, before we begin, we would like to start with a simple exercise that will engage us into the interactive Mentimeter. Please, before I continue into introducing the 2 panelists, I would like to ask you to take a few questions via the Mentimeter. You can also access the QR code over your phone, or you can view the link in the chat box. Either way, please respond to the 4 questions we have today, and we will present the answers as we continue into our presentation. The QR code is on your screen. Scan with your device, telephone or other device that in case you're using the telephone, then you use the laptop, vice versa, but also go through your link and access the questions. Yeah, we're seeing already people are responding. Question 1. Yeah, we have that number 1. Continue. And I encourage you to, we have question 1 already filling. We can saying that majority are saying no, and some but majority are saying no. We have 3 people who have answered question 1. Let me know if you have any challenges in responding or accessing the QR code. In case you are not able to scan the QR code, kindly check the link in the chat box. Let's go to question 2. Because question 2, so we already saw that on the question 1 that was on land degradation neutrality, whether it can be achieved. If half of land are excluded from decision making, people said they're not sure. But question 2, if women lack secure land tenure, what do we see here? Majority are saying that that may not benefit everyone. That is a good response. We are seeing that people already responding good number. We have 19 responses. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. We're getting a good number of people are being actively engaged. Please, if you work on land, how do you often include gender consideration? So let us see how many people are able to access. Yeah.
So, Ellen, it sounds like there's quite a strong response in terms of people feeling that if gender isn't taken into consideration, that restoration is not going to benefit everyone. So here we see 25 people have already feel that some people are saying that restoration may not last.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at the chart. Very interesting answers. And I'm happy to see that people are actually answering. And gender is being taken into very serious consideration. Thank you for that. Yeah. Can we
So
go to the
25
next?
people
Yeah,
are already saying that they're taking into consideration, and sometimes a few people are not yet. So it's really great to see these people in the room.
yeah. And between sometimes and rarely, almost same number, right? It's interesting. Yeah. So please continue to analyze.
So here's some thoughts in terms of what it takes to turn gender responsiveness into LDN commitments at local and national levels. So there's inclusive dialogues, funding and commitment, participatory planning, participation and political commitment. Political will.
Political action oriented, but most of them won't need political will and also understanding so that information, knowledge is required. We can see here gender responsive policies, political willingness and planning, strengthening local governance. Yeah. So we're seeing quite a number. I think we have a good number of responses. We can continue, right?
Yes.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for responding. We have good number of responses and they're very, very positive and encouraging. And I'm sure that by the end of our webinar today, we will have solid answers to our objectives. So moving on to the session, I would like to invite the first of the two guests for today is Lorena Aguiar. She is the Executive Director of the Kashak Institute at Birmingham University, Binghamton University. She is a global leader passionate about gender equality, human rights, inclusion, and sustainable development, with over 3 decades of providing strategic contributions to national and international policies. Lorena leads inclusive collaboration with government counterparts, UN agencies, international organizations, and civil society towards advancing equitable, sustainable development. Lorena has extensive field experience in over 50 countries across Latin America, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia. She has also served as Vice Minister and Minister ad interim of Foreign Affairs of Costa Rica. Lorena, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation for this event. Can you see the presentation?
I can see. I think people can see as well.
Okay, so I have the honor to talk a little bit of how gender has been mainstream within the convention. And I think we need to start from the beginning when the 3 Rio Conventions were created. What is very interesting to point out is that UNCCD was the only one that really saved the face from the Rio Conventions, because UNFCCC had 0 mention, the Climate Change Convention, and CBD only had 1 preambular mention. The origins of the process, really, it's part of that background, because both the Climate Change Convention and the Convention on Biodiversity were mainly originated from the Northern environmental organizations and UN bodies. But UNCCD was the only one proposed by the South. It really was created from those countries that were facing desertification, drought, and land degradation. And it's very interesting because since its creation in this text from 1994, it already recognizes the role of women in rural livelihood and explicitly encourage equal participation of women and men. So it was way ahead from what we had at the moment. When you look at the mandates, they also can tell you how serious gender had been mainstream. All the COPs, except for the 7, have included gender mandate. And one of the most important decisions was in 2011 that gave birth to its formal gender policy. And we're going to talk about that. It's what is called the Advocacy Policy Framework. And it laid the ground for today's mandatory mainstreaming that we had. So what does this APF had? It was the first thematic mandate. It specifically requested the ES to integrate gender sensitive, at that time the word was sensitive, approach into the thematic issues of drought and water scarcity. And it was the first time that we had a technical pillar of the convention that was legally tied to gender outcomes. But it also provides the parties with a how-to, and of vital importance were the guide for integrating gender into the NAPs, something that the other conventions came quite late into that same process. It also made monitoring mandatory, formal review and assessments of gender programs. We had it at COP11 and 12, created cycle of accountability that prevented gender being just ignored between the sessions. And it also called for what it's an institutional alignment, that UNCCD gender goals with other global standards like the SDG, making gender then a core part also of the strategic framework. And then at COP13, we had the GAP, the Gender Action Plan. And the aim of the GAP is to support the implementation of the 2018-2030 strategic framework, and ensuring that gender remains a core focus on land degradation neutrality, drought resilience, and women lands rights. So the SF and the gap are really married in the sense that they go side by side, and they should be implemented and respond to the needs and objectives and visions of both documents. And it has four major pillars: inclusive participation, economic empowerment, land rights and resources, and access to knowledge and technology. Those are the four main priority areas of the gap. Now, in the COP15, a gender roadmap was also produced in addition to the gap. So these gender roadmaps tells you how things needs to be moving along, the more practical part. And one important thing that we have is going to happen in 2026 is the establishment of a follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the gap. And this is going to happen at the next COP when we are in Mongolia. So hopefully it has been requested that we have a side event to really develop the criteria, what needs to be in this follow-up mechanism for the implementation of the gap. And then you can see the other areas. Now, interestingly, in this gender roadmap to 2030, and we're going to talk a little bit more later on, there is no mandate to continue or to enhance the gap. So the gap, since it's, again, side by side with the strategic framework, should need to be revised and updated. But unfortunately, the gender roadmap doesn't really mark the need to do that. And we'll come back to that in a second. So when we look at the mandates and the decisions, we have some quite strong language when it comes to LDN. Ask for gender responsive projects. All the parties are required to integrate gender perspective in the design, planning, and implementation of LDN projects to ensure that they don't perpetuate inequalities. We also have, in the strategic framework, focus on enhancing women land access, increasing their role in decision-making, and strengthening women resilience through drought. And very specifically, it calls for land rights and access, securing women land tenure and rights to ensure. Because as some of you already pointed out in the questions, it is essential for achieving LDN. Then we have reporting and data. Since 2023, country reports on LDN targets and drought resilience must include sex disaggregated data, and also calls to the need to strengthen the capacity of women and girls to manage land sustainability. But we are at the moment, as I said, that so much have happened. We have gone from gender sensitive to gender responsive, and there is a need now that we need to start the process of developing the new gender action plan in parallel with the strategic framework to call for a paradigm shift. And I really think, and this is where we're moving, a lot of us that are working on this, is that gender equality cannot be seen right now only as a fashion or something that we just should do to be politically correct. But we need to start seeing it as an accelerator for tackling the triple planetary environmental crisis. And what do we mean by that? That the baselines and the analysis that we have should not only focus on deficiencies, lacks, or shortages. Yes, we need to carry gender analysis in which we produce these differences, but we need to go beyond the analysis of only these differentiated impacts of the environmental crisis to report on differentiated actions in combating it. So we have great amount of knowledge and case studies and projects and initiatives in which women are really having an important stewardship role. And we need to start collecting this information more in gender scientific data. For example, we know in some projects, and I'm going to give you the example of Costa Rica, in which the plots or the farms of the women have better land restoration efforts at the moment, and the soils are more capable of sustaining the crops that they have. But we need to get this collection. We have to engender more this scientific data. And then we need to provide technical offer that catalyzes precisely these women environmental efforts. And we have to move from only looking at women roles like in gardens and cook stoves and micro things to really bring innovation. There's so many initiatives. We have scientists, women in various parts of the world that are really creating new ways to sustain grasslands, new way to inoculating grasslands with different fungus, for example, to make them more resistant to drought. And then the monitoring and evaluation system need to capture these impacts of women action. So this is a major paradigm shift that we're calling for. We're going to have a side event during the next COP to look at what should the new gender action plan needs to be developed. And I think that one of the things that will be very interesting to see is a gender action plan linked to technical topics, specifically to land degradation, to drought. So it's not only about the principles of participation, but how will that be seen and what are the things that needs to be brought into this discussion to gender equality to be seen again as an accelerator. I was telling you of some of these examples. In Iran, Dr. Medbahan said has employed microhysal fungi to enhance and restore vegetation and improve soil quality. You have in Kenya the women from Amboseli Landscape in charge of grass seed bankings, and they serve as a vital repository of diverse grass species adapted to local climatic conditions. And Peru, you see there, the Machaca sisters are recuperating the raising of water, values knowledge, and traditional ending technologies on the care of the liquid, rescuing the wisdom of raising and agricultural practices from indigenous people. So just to finalize, if we continue depicting women or any person as weak, defenseless, deprived, and vulnerable only, they will always rely on someone to look out for them and make decisions on their behalf. So I really encourage you to start thinking a little bit outside the box. We're going to start with these new, the new era, let's call it, of a new gap in the convention. So it's time that we start making this paradigm shift and seeing gender equality for what it is always and has been, an accelerator. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lorena. That was a very, very interesting indeed. And I would like now to invite our second panelist, Ms. Naina Javeri, who is a senior research and evaluation advisor at Landesa. Naina has nearly 3 decades of experience in community-based land and natural resources management. Her work spans key areas such as tenure security, forest governance and restoration, gender equality and social inclusion, climate and as well as climate change, with extensive field experience across Asia. Naina holds a PhD in geography from Clark University and has also taught at institutions including the University of Washington and Colgate University. In addition to her work with USAID Tenure and Global Climate Change Project, she has authored influential research and practical guides with organizations like C4, that is Center for International Forestry Research, and the International Food Policy Research Institute. Naina, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a beautiful day in Rome, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Could I get my, slide? Great. So I'm going to be talking in a sort of supplementary way to Lorena's presentation. I'm going to be looking more at what kinds of interventions have been tried and what else could we think of going forward to ensure that LDN is implemented in a gender responsive way. Next slide, please. So in addition to this project that's going on civil society engagement, Landesa is also a partner in a new project that has been initiated by FAO with support from Jeff. And so Landesa is one of the partners, but the International Land Coalition and TNG, which is a think tank for sustainability based in Germany, we are all partners in this new project that the title of which is Addressing Tenure Governance and Gender Equality in Land Rights to Strengthen LDN Initiatives. It just started off late last year and it runs until 2028. And the aim is really to develop capacities to strengthen responsible, inclusive, and gender equitable tenure governance in LDN initiatives in 4 countries. And those are Kyrgyzstan, Paraguay, South Sudan, and Sri Lanka. Just in the last 3 days, we had an intensive workshop here in Rome, thinking about really how do we bring gender equity in land rights together with LDN initiatives and kind of build a coherent nexus and a conceptual framework to inform the work. Next slide, please. So today what I'd like to cover is very briefly to talk about what is it that happens when there's desertification, drought, soil degradation, forest loss, in terms of its gender differentiated impacts. And after briefly setting up the stage on that, I'd really like to kind of zoom in on what is it we think about when we think about gender responsive sustainable land management. What comes onto our radar in terms of interventions and initiatives to bring about positive and long-lasting change. Number 3, I'd like to just briefly introduce real-world examples on how gender has been integrated into LDN strategies and restoration programs. And then I'll end briefly with some recommendations for civil society engagement within national LDN processes. And given COP17 is coming up, this is really quite critical. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Great. So, in fact, Lorena Aguilar has, prepared a publication in 2022 talking about and bringing together a kind of integrated perspective on really what are the differentiated impacts of desertification, land degradation, and drought on women and men. And you can find this online. It's a great kind of overview of really what's been happening. But what we know is that, first of all, women have been very significantly affected by these environmental changes. And because they don't have strong land rights, they don't really have the assets with which to develop any responses that are effective in the face of these environmental challenges. So what happens as degradation proceeds is there's increased workload for women as they have to go further afield, spend more time in managing land. As a result, there's worsening health and safety issues. Very often there's forced migration and shifting responsibilities between men and women in communities. Of course, there's food insecurity because of the degrading situation on land and water. And in short, they're really no longer quite as able to manage agricultural lands or common property systems. And as a result, as you can tell, there's this kind of vicious cycle that builds in where women have less and less capabilities to address it. So some sort of proactive response is needed to ensure that this cycle doesn't quite continue in this very sort of, negative fashion. Next slide, please. So I think this issue of how do we think about gender responsive sustainable land management is very important. On the one hand, we have the GAP, the Gender Action Plan that Lorena mentioned. We have some sense of what initiatives have taken place according to various types of landscapes that are degraded. But we probably need to step back a little bit and think about really what else can we do to kind of bring about a more integrated or holistic approach to sustainable land management. Next slide, please. So we know, as Lorena has indicated, that the gender responsive sustainable land management agenda has been growing. Gender caucuses, CSO engagements and panels, they've all been working to kind of bring about greater visibility of the gender agenda and also think more carefully at the same time about what are the ways in which women can be strategic agents of change. So I'm not going to go into the details of the Gender Action Plan because Lorraine has already covered it, but we have these 4 main areas that it currently covers, and we'll see what the new strategic framework will address. So participation in decisions of various kinds, enhancing women's access to improved knowledge and technologies, integrating women's empowerment in the implementation of activities, and strengthening women's land rights and access to resources. So it's a 4-part approach currently in the GAP. And next slide, please. So what I wanted to, I wanted to just quickly elaborate each of those points. You know, in the GAP we have, this is actually a briefing note that was prepared by UNCCD in the year after the GAP was prepared, so in 2019. So we want to ensure gender equal and meaningful participation in natural and land and natural resource governance. And here I just want to pause and say that it'll be very useful to open up that box on participation. What do we really mean when we talk about a gender responsive approach to participation? Secondly, we are going to be focused on strengthening and enforcing legal protections for the land rights of women and vulnerable groups. And here we can also take a little step back and think about, while legal protections offer tenure security, what else is needed really to bring about a perception of tenure security that will then enable women and men to invest their time, efforts, knowledge into regenerating land. Next slide, please. Thirdly, we have a focus on equalizing the access, use, and control over land, forests, and natural resources. And this is very much affiliated with issues of land tenure, both over individual or agricultural lands, as well as common property systems that are communally managed, or use of communal lands on public lands. So there are multiple types of tenure regimes that are being addressed in this issue of access, use, and control. And then lastly, the GAP focuses on the gender gap in terms of data. As Lorena mentioned, there is an increasing focus on disaggregated data, but also we really want to track exactly how interventions are producing important outcomes and impact. And so there are various platforms associated with UNCCD that are involved in the reporting kind of elements. Next slide, please. So I would like to kind of take one step back, and perhaps some of you have already come across this framework that puts into place the sort of 4 different categories of interventions and change that in totality lead us to a more gender equitable world. So we have, this is actually put together by IFPRI, and initially the framework consisted of the reach, benefit, and empower elements. But over time, as the kind of gender transformative thinking kicked into motion, a 4th box was added on transform. So here, why this is important is that for quite some time, there was a lot of focus on reach. How can we bring more women to the table, whether it's at a local community-based governance body on forests or lands, pasture lands, women's membership on committees to do with land at a high level, national bodies, parliamentary women. We've been focused on numbers of women and their involvement in decision making. That's important, but that's one part of the kind of overall journey towards gender equality. So when we think about the next box, which is on benefit, we're really thinking about how is it that women's engagement would produce improvements in well-being of women in terms of their livelihoods, in terms of the ecosystems that they're working within. And so here we're really looking more so at how reach would then lead to improvements for women in their daily lives, in their communities, for their children, and so on. And then the third box on empower is really, perhaps we could equate it with a gender responsive approach, where here we're looking more at mobilizing then changes in decision-making systems and authoritative control over resources and decision-making, whether it's at a local level or at a national level. The question here is, how can we build the participatory presence of women into actually influential decisions, leveraging their knowledge systems and so on. And then the last box that is part of this journey is the transform box, in which we really start to see and push for more structural changes. So substantial changes in gender norms, social practices, changes in larger forms of decision-making, and so on and so forth, legal changes, and etc. So really, we have this very interesting journey that does not have to be sequentially developed. This could be multiple interventions simultaneously in 2, 3, 4 of these boxes that in aggregate produce this kind of very big leap that takes us forward on gender equality. So I wanted to share that as we increasingly start to think of exactly what are the interventions that we need in order to bring about stronger outcomes on LDN, but also gender equitable outcomes. Next slide, please. So we are thinking when we want to bring about catalytic change at multiple levels. So we have, of course, the very local village level, and then we have the sort of high levels. So I'm going to move quickly. I have very little time. We have multi-stakeholder platforms. We have women-led, women-driven, and women-only initiatives, but that are blended with mixed gender initiatives. And the aim is that these are incubating women's ability to make decisive interventions on questions of LDN, leveraging CSO capability, improving women's leadership, and building male champion networks. Next slide, please. So one of the components for change that's absolutely fundamental is having secure land and resource tenure for women. These are critical levers when women have access to certain assets over which they have authority and control. They can leverage it for a whole range of benefits. Next slide, please. So very recently, there was an important report that came out of FAO, the Status of Land Tenure and Governance report, just in February this year, that has a wonderful set of data on women's land rights, questions of tenure more generally by region. I would encourage you to look for it. It provides a very interesting account of where we are on land tenure globally. Next slide, please. We also have a new report that just came out 2-3 weeks ago from Prindex that examines then perceptions of tenure security in gender differentiated way. All of this provides us tremendous food for thought as to how to design our interventions. Next slide, please. And in our project going on with FAO, we're also thinking about how to turn a focus on tenure and LDN into one that's focused on gender equitable tenure arrangements for achieving LDN goals. I don't have time to go into these details, but this is a document that was prepared by FAO called something like LDN and VGs, consisted of 9 pathways. And we've now in this project drafted something which turns it into a gender equitable approach, bringing gender equity or equality, tenure, and LDN into one framing. Next, please. I'm going to run through, I'm going to miss this. Next slide, please. So I think that what is very important in thinking about gender equitable land rights is to think across the landscape. So some of the interventions on LDN are about higher level policy, legal activities, but when we start to focus on specific landscapes, what's really important is to map out the tenure mosaics across landscapes, to link up tenure with land use patterns, and to understand the multifunctionality of the landscapes, because in every landscape there are then agricultural lands, women's little farms, orchards, forest areas, and so on. So how do we build a kind of integrated understanding of how we can leverage everyone's tenure rights to build a kind of cohesive approach to addressing LDN, and in which we recognize relational land governance? We have people who may be landless, who have tenancy rights. How can we bring everyone together to achieve change? I'm not going to go into the other details, but the idea is to think across a landscape as opposed to only thinking about agricultural land rights for women. Next slide, please. So, and next slide, please. I'm going to just very briefly focus on one category of land degradation, which is rangelands. And this is an important year this year. 2026 is both the year of rangelands and pastoralists. The FAO has, initiated this year, but it's also the year of women farmers. And so we have this very interesting linkage between these two celebrations of the capability of women and pastoralists. So what we know is that rangelands are very complicated. They're not recognized because they are in the background. They don't receive public attention. But what we are now seeing is increasing focus on how can we leverage women's knowledge, women's capacities in land governance to transform these landscapes. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to again go through these details, but there are wonderful resources available that document then women's role in improving the condition of rangelands for pastoralists. The Global Land Outlook from 2024 focuses on rangelands and pastoralists. In there, you'll see many case studies about Pastoral Women's Council in Tanzania, Women's Livestock Farmers Network in Spain, Indian women's networks, and so on. And they document really how women have been activated to create change. Landesa currently coordinates a global platform called Stand for Her Land. And we have a case study on Ethiopia and
Did we lose our presenter, or is it my network?
I
We
think
may have lost her.
Okay. We may have lost her. Okay. In case she'll be able to join us, we will continue. But in the meantime, I would like to thank both presenters for a very interesting session. And we will continue where we have terminated at the moment, once our presenter will be able to rejoin us. I would like us to join a Q&A session. Sorry, my camera is off. I don't know why. Yeah, I would like to invite everyone to the question and answer session. I have seen a number of questions in the Q&A chat, but also in the webinar chat box. Those who have questions, kindly raise your hand and you will be invited to speak. And at the meantime, I'll go to Q&A. I think there was a question for the first presenter where she was asked to kindly elaborate on how the pillars that you presented are applied on the ground, especially how they are implemented to integrate and empower rural women and local communities who are at the forefront of land use. So I think this question is for you, Lorena. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here with you.
Okay, thank you. If you can, and then there was another one. Diane Lydia, she asked in French, but translation will read as follows. Do the monitoring and evaluation frameworks for national climate commitments, particularly the NDCs, incorporate gender-specific indicators that make it possible to concretely measure women's contributions to climate change adaptation solutions? And if this is so, what mechanisms ensure that these gender disaggregated data effectively inform policy making, resource allocation, and the implementation of climate actions? So these are the questions that I'm seeing in the chat box.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm gonna address the first one because I think that Naina had provided a lot of examples on how to do this on the ground. When it comes to NDCs, it's up to the countries how they mainstream gender consideration, even though we have almost 150 plus mandates in the Convention of Climate Change to ensure that gender issues are mainstream. The problem precisely is to move to a good statement saying that gender equality is important, to really see it unfold at the projects and the initiatives that the countries are taking into account. So with the new gender action plan, the Belém gender action plan that was just approved last year, there is an a request for parties to enhance their work on indicators. We're also producing a analysis with UN Women of the new NDCs to see how much they're really mainstreaming it and how the indicators and their M&E systems are put into place. Now, another way that you can measure how the projects, the countries are really mainstreaming gender considerations is in the projects that they're implementing through the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund or the GEF. And under those funds, there is a whole discussion. For example, on the GEF, you basically talk only about beneficiaries. So there is right now a whole process to move the indicators of some of these initiatives a little bit further to really look at what is gender responsive, because gender responsive is not only acknowledging the differences, but also what are you doing to close those gender gaps. So while we have advanced, not all the NDCs worldwide have really advanced on the topic of data and indicators to measure the change, the transformation that Nania was talking about.
Thank you. There is also, I'm not seeing hands, but there is a question from a Spanish speaker. Is asking if women lack secure land tenure, how could this affect land restoration efforts in terms of impact, restoration sustainability, benefit? She's not sure how it can be done.
Well, land tenure is essential. If you don't own the land, you cannot make decisions, and you will never benefit from the projects directly because you don't have the power, again, to make decisions on the land. So land tenure is one of the building blocks when you talk about LDN, is instrumental, is fundamental. However, we see women conducting enormous amount of efforts linked to LDN without secure land tenure. But we see how the impact of owning land really can move forward and really accelerate the way that women can get involved in this type of initiatives.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience? Because we would like to see more interactive session. Please, I would like to see hands before we proceed with questions in the chat box.
I'm sorry, my
Kindly, the
Wi-Fi
audience.
just suddenly
I'm
died.
seeing more introductions rather than questions. Yeah.
Ellen, just to point out that Naina is back into the room. She had issues with her Wi-Fi.
Yes, I'm sorry, we ran out of, I mean, I couldn't quite finish, but I think I would love to talk about the questions in the PowerPoint.
We are back.
Hi, Naina.
Hi, Lorena.
Hi, Naina. Sorry. Thank you for returning back to our session. Welcome back. We were addressing questions, and I'm not sure if we can still find them in the chat because, oh yeah, they're still there. So I'm asking people to raise hands because we want to be an interactive session and not a one-sided contribution. I would like to hear voices from the audience. Please raise your hand.
You have one. You have Ali share.
Okay, please. It's not visible on my side. Thank you. I can't see that. Okay.
But he's muted at the moment.
Unmute your camera. Oh, sorry, unmute your microphone and proceed. Yeah, Alishir Kurban, you are most welcome. Unmute your microphone. Maybe we'll ask our administrator to unmute the microphone as well to help us.
I have requested to unmute, but we do have Maria who perhaps can go so long.
Maria Jose, you can continue and press on the microphone so you can unmute. Yeah. Please proceed with your question.
Yo, María José. Ok. No, compartirles la información. ¿Hay traducción o tengo que hablar en inglés?
Puede hablar en español y no tenemos introducción aquí.
Soy María José Lubertino de la Red de Defensoras del Ambiente y el Buen Vivir de Argentina y de la Red Ecofeminista Latinoamericana y del Caribe. Nuestras organizaciones están muy involucradas en el seguimiento de la Cumbre de Cambio Climático y la de Biodiversidad, pero quisiéramos involucrarnos más en el seguimiento de la Convención de Desertificación. En el caso de Argentina, la situación es muy grave porque, bueno, 80% de nuestro territorio está desertificado en este momento y no paran los agrotóxicos, la sojización, el avance de la soja y el avance de la minería extractivista genera mayor desertificación. Entonces vemos una conexión triangular entre las tres convenciones y por supuesto somos feministas, ecofeministas y quisiéramos incorporarnos en el grupo de seguimiento de la convención, así que bueno, queremos invitar a Lorena para alguna charla en particular, lo pusimos ahí en el grupo y ver cómo nos podemos incluir, ¿no? Eso.
Thank you. Before we proceed with the next question, Alicia Kurban, I have seen your comment in the webinar chat. Please type your question, then we will respond to you. Yes, we noted that your microphone has a problem. Kindly type your question and it will be answered. Thank you. Do we have any more questions in the group today? Participants?
There's another in the chat there.
Yeah, please proceed. I'm seeing Stella Wanjala, you have a hand up. Unmute your microphone.
Hello? Okay,
Please.
sorry. Yeah, I've managed to unmute. My name, like we said, is Stella. Grateful to be here. And I am a co-founder of an organization that is women-led. And our entry into community is actually women. And we work with quite a number of them. And I like what we are discussing here, because then if we can be able to like mainstream women in land ownership, this is going to really go a long way in improving conservation and climate action. Our thematic area in the community is actually climate action, and we train women to become agents of climate action and accelerate adaptation and mitigation. And I just noticed that at the higher level, at the global level, it's not very clear how the global level and even the national level then can trickle down to impact on the woman, the grassroots women on the ground, so that they can benefit from decisions that are made at global levels. Like, for example, the decisions that are made at COP. How do they trickle down to the grassroots people? Because if they remain up there, then we will do our discussions, but we are not impacting the people who are actually dealing with land matters. Another thing I've seen is that there are so many women organizations that are strong in conservation and climate action, but it's not easy for them to access grants. For example, GF, even the small grants, they already have specific organizations that are accredited to receive that money. And in most cases, you find that money comes to those organizations, but may not trickle down to the grassroots people. So I was just wondering, what are the requirements for a grassroots or a national organization or a grassroots organization that is doing exemplarily well in the area of conservation? What are the requirements for such an organization to become accredited, maybe to receive funding from GF or such? And then another question which I had asked earlier, how can we become members of the Women Caucus, maybe on CBD or UN, FCC, or at the convention levels? Because we are handling women who are really working, but how to get them join and enjoy the benefits of the members of the caucus is not very easy to break through and get there. That's why I was asking maybe for a
Thank you,
link.
thank you. We need to have time. We received the 2 questions. Thank you. We need to allow others to ask questions, and we have time limitation.
Can we answer some of the questions, Ellen?
Yes, please.
So a María
mm.
José le voy a responder en español. Será un placer el poder trabajar con usted. Acabamos de terminar para el acuerdo de Escazú, María José. Y entiendo que defensoras, entonces sería muy interesante. A través de la organización puedes pedir mis datos y con mucho gusto los puedo compartir. Stella. And for Estela, you touched 2 very important points. One is the direct access. It's very complicated for the resources that are now available because you have to go through an implementing agency. So one of the things that you need to understand is what is the financial ecosystem in your country? Who are the focal points for these funds? Who is the focal point for the Green Climate Fund, for the Adaptation Fund, from the GEF, and try to get in contact with them and understand which are the projects and which are the implementing agency. Only the Adaptation Fund has a small window in which women organizations can access directly if they are not an implementing agency. Becoming an implementing agency could be a challenge for a small NGO. And you have to go through all of those accreditation criteria to see if you can fulfill them. When it comes into participation, all the caucuses or all the women groups are open. If you can go to the meetings, there are daily meetings, for example, of women constituency under the Climate Change Convention, under the CBD as well. And for the Women Caucus, I saw that somebody posted, but you have to be registered. However, if you're able to go to the meeting, if somebody else put you in their delegation, these are spaces that are open for the participation of any one of the participants that are going to the conventions.
Thank you. Naina, you would like to add something? You would like to respond?
No, I think, Lorena is more involved at that level. So I think her insight is very useful.
Okay, I have a question here in the chat box. The first question says, hello, I'm Sela from Botswana. How do we get women back into farming in the face of urbanization? Some families, that is women, sell their plots for quick cash, which leaves them off long term as they don't have any more assets. I will continue with the next question so that you can immediately respond here. The next question is, in your view, what practical steps are most needed to ensure gender-responsive approaches in land restoration and climate adaptation programs with GAP? Yeah, so those are the two questions that I'm saying. And there is no name attached, so both of you are free to respond.
Thank you. I mean, I'll just share some thoughts on that first. On the issue of selling land and urbanization, it's a very complicated question, clearly, because there are larger dynamics at work, land markets, lack of productivity in agricultural lands, and so on. But in this context, I would be interested to know, for example, if women had any formal title to that land, or whether the decision was made by male members of the household, for example, to sell the land. Those are certain things to kind of begin to look at, because it may be that there'll be quite a different perspective among women and men in households as to whether or not to actually sell the land to begin with. I think women will be thinking of certain priorities, such as looking after children, food security, nutrition, whereas men may be thinking of other priorities. And so that's kind of one way of thinking about it. But clearly, globally, urbanization and that sort of juggernaut is definitely moving ahead. And I think that that's not a question that can be answered in a simple way. There are a complex set of factors at work, which would then have to be addressed. In terms of the second question on gender-responsive restoration approaches, I would say that there is no single answer clearly in any given context, because every context is very different in terms of gender norms, in terms of women's land rights, in terms of governance arrangements, women's capacities to participate in the public space, and so on. But I would say that so far, I don't think there has been a lot of compilation of good practices in different country contexts to really identify what's working and not. For example, the 2024 document produced on reporting called The Land Story that talks about the various indicators, and what country reports have shown. It has a very little section at the very end on gender dimensions, of LDN. And then there are just little vignettes, from this country, that country, this project. But in fact, we cannot take away any insights from this kind of vignettes. Rather, we need a kind of systematic look at what are the good practices, particularly by types of environmental degradation, desertification, drought, agricultural soil degradation, and so on. And what is it we can pull together? Because what I see in a lot of these initiatives is a lot of creative thinking, multiplicity of approaches, women on landscape committees, multi-stakeholder platforms, leveraging traditional knowledge, financial inclusion. There's a lot of activity. But for someone coming new to the table, it's really not easy to figure out what is the first 2-3 steps that you might want to take. And so even in the last 3 days of this workshop I was at, I heard from many of the country partners that we would love to learn about good practices, on gender equitable tenure rights. And so far, we haven't really produced a series of reports of that kind that can then inform creative design of intervention. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I want to go more in depth on the question about urbanization. I mean, it is a challenge if they have lost their plots. But right now, there's so many new innovative ways people are doing hydroponia. They're growing things in smaller places. So there are different ways, the roofing of the buildings or the houses. So farming in parks and collective spaces. So there are different ways, Mohammed, and that there is more innovation in trying to work with urban producers, especially if they have lost their plots. So I encourage you to look at some of these initiatives that are being taken care of.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions in the audience? Yeah. I'm not seeing any raised hands. In that case, I will ask just a general question to both of you for the sake of 2 minutes of our time. We are heading into COP17, and definitely issues of gender and, women, especially in rangelands and in pastoralists, the topic that has, evolved this year is actually very, very spoken about, and we are all waiting to hear and to see what will be coming out of COP17. So what message would you advise the CSOs to carry forward going forward to COP17? What key areas should we concentrate on in terms of gender inclusivity? Is that a difficult question? It has no right or wrong answer.
Hope not.
It's just to brainstorm. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a brainstorming session.
Yes, I think that participation and full engagement. You need to first, one of the things that we're doing is all these training courses of what UNCCD is about and how to engage in COPs. You need to make a plan why you're going to COP. What are going to be your messages? What do you want to achieve? It's not a trip to Mongolia. You really need to say, okay, why am I going to Mongolia? What is the message do I want to bring? Do I want to portray examples of women working in the not only pastoralism and other areas and in grasslands, but in general. But I also encourage you to look very closely to the side events that are being organized, to go to the Gender Caucus. As I said, we are organizing various meetings, but the 2 more strategic meetings that will frame what is going to happen in the next years is the follow-up mechanism, so that you can put there what you really think should be the way that we have to monitor and evaluate, because monitoring and evaluation allows you to do that. And the other one is the definition of the new gender action plan.
Thank you. And because we don't have time, I would like to hear from the other presenter, but in the absence of time, I would like, first of all, to thank you very much, both very honorable presenters today, Naina and Lorena, for sharing this very important information ahead of our COP17 conference. In closing, I would like to thank our panelists for insightful information. And the key takeaways from today's sessions are as follows. Land degradation neutrality is not only about acres of land restored, but it is also about who benefits, who participates, and how land management changes in the longer term. Also, we're talking about gender equality strengthens the sustainability and legitimacy of LDN. Civil society engagement is critical to ensure gender-responsive neutrality pathways, as well as we're seeing that achieving LDN requires inclusive governance and equitable access to land and resources. We also noted that the gender inequality can directly undermine neutrality outcomes, and the UNCCD provides a framework that is Gender Action Plan plus COP decisions to support gender-responsive LDN. We're also taking note of highlighting that translating gender commitments into practical implementation at national and local levels is essential for achieving lasting LDN outcomes, and civil society has leverage points at national LDN target setting and implementation stages. And finally, remember that the recording and slides of today's webinar will be shared with you via email, and they will also soon be available on Drynet website. And I would like to share information about the next webinar of this webinar series. Join us on September 10th at 1400 hours GMT to learn about agroecology and nature-based solution. You are invited. Have a nice rest of the day, and thank you all for participation. Bye-bye.